Hi guys, this is day 4 of the 42-day revision challenge and we are going to discuss market equilibrium. So the market equilibrium is arrived when the market forces of demand and supply meet. We say that the market equilibrium is where the demand and supply curves meet. So if we draw the diagram for market equilibrium, now we'll bring both the demand and supply curve together to see the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So let's draw the demand curve. Demand curve is downward sloping, supply curve is upward sloping, and we have where demand meets supply, the market equilibrium price P naught and equilibrium quantity Q naught. So this is the point where we say that when the market is in equilibrium, we say this, that QD, the quantity demanded, is equal to quantity supplied. Now, the reason why we call this as equilibrium is an important reason, because we say this, that at this point, let's call this point A. At this point A, where QT equals QS, there is no tendency for price to change. No tendency for price to change. In other words, neither there is a reason for the price to fall or a reason for the price to rise at that quantity. It will change, of course, if the demand changes or supply changes, but given the supply and demand doesn't change, we say this, that there is no tendency for price to change. Now, we can show this, that what if the price is not P naught, but let's say P1. So if the price is not P naught but P1, which is above equilibrium, is this also an equilibrium price? And the answer is no, it's not an equilibrium price, because QD is not equal to QS. In fact, at P1, we can say this, that this is the point where quantity demanded is, because remember, at quantity demanded is the quantity bought at a particular price. So this is the point where the quantity demanded is, while this is the point where quantity supplied is. So at P1, we can say this, that quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. In fact, we call this as surplus production. What happens if there's a surplus and the producer is unable to sell this higher quantity that is produced? And the answer is this, that at P1, because the price was too high, the producers got encouraged and they ended up producing more than what was demanded. And because at P1 the price was higher than what the consumers wanted the price to be, we have a surplus. So the only way we could get rid of the surplus is by lowering the price. So the price will start to lower. So producer will start to lower their prices. And as the producers start to lower their prices, consumers will encourage to buy more of the good until we come to point A, which is in equilibrium. So if the price is more than the equilibrium, so any price above equilibrium will lead to a surplus or excess supply, leading to a downward pressure on price. So let's now see what happens when the price is not P naught but below equilibrium. Let's say the price is, for example, P2. If the price is not at equilibrium but below equilibrium, like P2, that's good news for consumers. Consumer will suddenly be demanding more. So consumers will be, let's say, at this point here, where quantity demanded will be much more than it was before. But at the same time, producers, knowing that the price has gone down below equilibrium, they will be discouraged. So they will start cutting down on the supplies to the market, and as a result, quantity demanded now will be more than quantity supplied. So quantity demanded will be greater than quantity supplied. And as a result of quantity demanded being more than quantity supplied, we call that as a surplus, or we call that as a shortage. You will have basically producers knowing that there are long queues waiting for the good to be sort of sold. They will now start to increase their price. So what I'm trying to say is this: any price below equilibrium will lead to a shortage, leading to an upward pressure on price. So there will be an upward pressure on price. Because the price is going up, some consumers will also be discouraged to buy the good, leading to quantity demanded to also fall. Ultimately, what we're trying to say is this: that at P naught, if it's an equilibrium price, QD equals QD equals QS, and therefore neither there is a shortage or a surplus, and therefore no tendency for price to change. So let me write this important point, that at equilibrium, there is neither a shortage nor a surplus. The next thing we want to talk about, which is important to know, is the concept of what changes the equilibrium price or quantity. So we need to talk about what are the reasons why equilibrium price or quantity can change. So we can look at some cases. The first case we can look at is changes in demand. We've talked about how demand curve can shift due to reasons like income, due to reasons like, for example, taste, or price of substitutes and complements. So let's assume a case where, let's say this is a current demand and supply of domestic cars. Okay, so this is domestic cars demand supply. So this is, let's say, U.S. market for demand and U.S. market for cars, and let's say currently equilibrium is P naught and quantity is Q naught. And what if consumers in the US start buying more of US cars because they start liking the new designs of the US cars? What will happen as a result of this? The demand will rise. When the demand rises for the good, you can see this at the price P naught, the older P naught price, you have a quantity demanded at point B. So we were at equilibrium at point A, and the demand rises for any reason. Then at the existing price, suddenly quantity demanded will be more than quantity supplied, and therefore P naught, which was previously an equilibrium price, is no longer an equilibrium price, because there is what we call demand exceeding supply, or there is what we call a shortage taking place. And as we said earlier, that if at the existing price QD is more than QS, we will have an upward pressure on price. So there is an upward pressure on price because suddenly P naught is no longer the equilibrium price. What's the impact of that? Well, the equilibrium price will then go up to P1 because the demand has gone up, and P1 you can see this, that QD is again equal to QS. So at P1, QD is again equal to QS, and we have an equilibrium price P1 and an equilibrium quantity Q1. So two things have happened. Number one, a rise in demand has led to a rise in price, as we can see this, and B, there is a rise in quantity supplied. Now that's an important term to remember, that I'm not saying the supply has gone up, I'm saying quantity supplied has gone up. Why am I saying quantity supplied has gone up? Because for me, this is a rise in demand, which is a shift of the demand curve, but it's a movement along the supply curve. So let's call this point C. So when I come to point C, I am moving along the supply curve. And this language is important to remember, because if I say, a rise in demand leads to a rise in supply, that's wrong. A rise in demand leads to a rise in quantity supplied, which means I'm moving along the supply curve. We can look at another case where we have what we call a change in supply. And we know change in supply can take place where your supply curve can shift to the left or to the right depending on the cost of production. If the cost of production rises, let's say government decides to put a tax or give a subsidy, the supply curve will shift. So let's see in an example of a supply curve shifting to the right, which means cost of production is going down. And let's see what happens to the price and quantity produced. So if this is my demand and supply, let's say some major technological breakthrough results in supply curve to shift to the right. So supply curve now shifts to the right from S0 to S1. Previously, the equilibrium price was P0. At P0, we will find out, okay, so is it equilibrium? Is it still in equilibrium? And the answer is no, because at P0, quantity supplied is here, while quantity demanded is here, which means quantity supplied is more than quantity demanded now, which means there is a surplus, and in a surplus, there will be a downward pressure on price. So there will be a downward pressure on price because now more supply has taken place and there isn't enough demand, so the prices will have to go down. So if the prices start to go down to, for example, P1, which is my new equilibrium, and at P1 we can say this, that the price has gone down and there is a higher quantity demanded. So let me write this, that a rise in supply will result in, number one, a lower price, and number two, a rise in quantity supplied. Quantity demanded. And why am I saying quantity demanded? And the reason is that I am moving along the demand curve. So a change in supply leads to a movement along the demand curve. Similarly, a change in demand leads to a movement along the supply curve. And if we are moving along the demand curve and the demand is not changing, we call it change in quantity demanded. So that's how we go about changing supply. Sometimes what happens is that they are giving you a situation in exams where they change both demands. So there's a change in demand and there's also a change in supply. And let's do a case where we want to see where we want to see both demand and supply changing. So I want to do a case where, let's say, demand and supply initially were D0 and S0. And for example, two things happen. Number one, A, there is a natural disaster, and B, there is a fall in income. So if there's a natural disaster, we notice the supply curve will fall. If there's a fall in income, we notice that demand curve will also fall. Okay. Now the question to ask is that what happens to the quantity and what happens to the price? A natural disaster will basically, the effect A, natural disaster will result in the quantity to fall, and a fall in income will also result in the quantity to fall. So clearly quantity that is being bought is going down. Okay, but a natural disaster means supply curves fall, but when the supply falls, we know this, the price will go up. So I'm going to write this, the price is going up. While at the same time, the natural fall in income will result in lower demand and therefore a lower price. So we have a problem here. We know this quantity for sure goes down because both the factors are making the quantity go down. But the price, we don't know whether ultimately it will go down or not. In my diagram, for example, here, my price is marginally going up because the way I've made the diagrams, the price is marginally going up. But whenever you have a case like this where price is going down for one factor and price is going up for the other factor, we'll say that the price will ultimately be uncertain because we do not know, the magnitude of change of demand and supply. Does that make sense? So what we are trying to say is that demand, the price can go up. Like in my case, the price did go up because probably supply fall was exceeding the demand fall. But there could also be a possibility that the price can actually go down because demand fall might be exceeding the supply fall. So we do not know. If we do not know, we'll write uncertain or we'll choose an uncertain option for the price. But definitely quantity will go down because both factors are making the quantity to fall.